Hello, Gavin here, welcome back to the channel, where today we're looking at slap bass. Is something that I do use in my playing. In fact, you might have seen me use it in some of my other videos. So I thought today let's dive into the topic and see the different techniques that you'll often see other bass players using, and some cool ways to use the technique out with its typical styles it fits into. So first, let's look at a little history of the technique. It was first used by Larry Graham, a bass player for Sly and the Family Stone, who went on to have Graham Central Station, his own band, and do some solo things as well. There's many interviews with Larry Graham where he talks about the origins of the technique. And it all started when he made the switch from guitar to bass and was playing shows with his mum. She was playing piano and he was on the bass. And when they stopped using a drummer, he tried to emulate the sound of the kick drum and the snare by using his thumb as the kick drum and the plucks or pops as the snare drum. He refers to this as thumping and plucking, but there's loads of other terminology that you'll hear different bass players throughout there. And in fact, that's the amazing thing with slap bass. Larry Graham invented the technique, but so many other bass players have put their own spin on it and turned it into a technique that every bass player does slightly differently. But some of the common styles you'll see are the thumb up approach. Now this is the Marcus Miller style approach, like what I used in the intro clip, and that's where you have the thumb up, almost like giving someone the thumbs up, but side on, and you rotate your wrist to hit the note. To be honest, it's the technique that I recommend for my students because it gives you access to other elements that you can add in, but we'll come back to that in a little bit. The other common approach to slap bass is thumb down. Now this is what Flea does. Again, lots of other bass players do this, but there's definitely pros and cons to this one. It makes it harder to do double thumbs, which is something that a lot of modern bass players are using, and really the thumb up approach is the best for that type of playing. Even if we only used the thumb up approach, we could change the sound we get depending on how we do that. You see, the Larry Graham way is very different from the Marcus Miller approach. Marcus Miller's is, like I said, in the wrist, so there's like a bounce to what you're doing. But for the Larry Graham approach, you actually have to go through the string. So you hit the string and go through it, and you stop on the next string. It's a very different sound, so I'd highly recommend, if you're getting into this technique, try both out, try and learn to do both so you can tailor your tone to suit the song. Then of course the next part is plucking the string, which is using the inside of your first finger to just hold on to the string and pluck it. Some people use the middle finger as well, and again modern bass players are doing things like double plucking, added in with the double thumbs to get extra notes. Victor Wooten is kind of the master of this. Then you've also got players like Henrik Linder from Dirty Loops. He's an amazing example of what you can do with slap bass. Now at the start of the video you did hear me playing this bass with roundwound strings, both pickups on running direct into my Eden WTDI preamp, and it was a pretty flat EQ. Again, some bass players like to scoop the mids for slap bass, and others boost certain frequencies to get a unique tone. So it's really down to yourself how you want to shape the sound. Something you don't see quite as often is bass players using flatwounds for this technique. And depending on how you have your bass set up, the technique could actually be really hard to play with flatwounds. I personally find it harder to play slap bass with flatwounds because of the way I have my basses set up. But the sounds can be really cool, so definitely recommend trying this out if you have a bass with flatwounds. Today I'm going to be using a P Bass, Squier P Bass, through the same preamp rig, and I'll be playing over the same jam track as I did in the intro clip. And something you'll notice is that the P Bass with flats does sound incredibly different. but it's still a really cool sound. So I definitely recommend trying this out if you have a bass set up with Flatwounds, because it could be the perfect sound for the songs you're playing. So let's have a listen to that in the next clip so you can see how it sounds. We're going to look at using slap bass in different genres of music. See, what we looked at for the first two clips was definitely a more traditional setting for slap bass in a more funk environment. But slap bass can work really cool in other genres. So in the next clip, we're using it in a more ambient, atmospheric style track. And I'm going to be playing this bass. This is my 6-string Ibanez. Again, I'm not going to be using any effects, just this into the Eden preamp direct. But I am using the active EQ built into the bass with a little bit of treble boosted and a slight boost in the mids. And part of the reason I've gone for this bass for the track is this is a very common setup you'll see now. People using active electronics in 5 and 6 string basses, and slap works just as well on those as it does on a 4-string bass. Good examples of this would again be Henrik Linder from Dirty Loops. He plays 5 and 6 string basses and gets some fantastic sounds. So really, whether you're playing atmospheric electronic music or you're playing rock and metal, this technique is definitely something that's worth practicing because it could be so useful for certain songs. So let's have a look at that clip now so you can hear how this sounds in that context. So before I give some final thoughts on this topic, I wanted to look at fretless bass. Now, fretless bass can be amazing for slap bass. It's definitely something people aren't doing too often now, but in the 80s you'd hear bass players using a fretless for this. Now, I've actually put out a video all about fretless bass recently, and I'll put a link in the description so you can see that. And in that I used 2 slap examples. One is using slap on the fretless to emulate the sound of a double bass for a country or bluegrass environment, and it actually works really well for that. And the second was just using the bridge pickup with some chorus to emulate that iconic 80s fretless tone. So as well as the link in the description, I'm actually going to use the chorus clip at the end of this video so you can see how that sounds. But before we do that, I just want to give some final thoughts on slap bass. Really, I think it's an amazing technique. I know some think the technique's a bit overused by some bass players, but really I just think it's an amazing sound. And when you use it in other contexts than the typical uses, it's a really cool technique. So I highly recommend practicing the technique and learning how to use it properly, and when you do use it, work on your rhythm. Think about kick drum patterns and snare drum patterns. Think about the way drummers play, because ultimately that's what we're emulating. So try and listen to drummers, learn how they're using the kick and the snare combined, and try and emulate some of those patterns in your playing. And really focus on the rhythm side of it, making sure that the rhythm is still locked in tight when you're playing slap bass. But really, this is all just my opinion. I'd love to hear what you thought on the topic. So please let me know in the comments what your favourite playing clip was and how you're using these techniques in your playing, because I'd love to hear what you're all doing. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please hit like and subscribe down below, clicking the bell icon to be notified of more content when it comes out. And until next time, keep working on those bass faces.